am I glad to be back with you. Whew! I know you all probably had this vision of me just chilling on my laptop for the last couple of days. But let me tell you, this Avid training was a lot of work. I just got done doing 2.5 hours worth of homework. What? Anyway, so thank you for bearing with me during this time apart, and I'm glad we're back together. Because of this training and the interruption to our schedule, I really front-loaded most of the information to the first half of the week, so today we're just going to keep it kind of brief and wrap up by talking about how does understanding text structure impact you as a reader. Now, when we look at our text structures, the way they are titled pretty much tells us what the author wants us to get from it. Obviously, if it's a problem-solution structure, the author wants me to see the problem and understand the solution. So we're not going to go through all that like you can't figure that on your own.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We will do just a quick recap though, so these structures are fresh in your mind. The whole point of text structure is to create order, right? And organization in a text. So once you know what the structure is, you're identifying the ideas in the text and the relationships between them. So remember with description, we said the whole function is to take something that is larger and break it down into its parts and describe each one, for you to get a more specific understanding of the various parts of a larger structure, concept, or idea. So as you read description, that's the focus. Looking at that whole to part relationship. What's the big idea and what are the smaller details I need to learn about it? Sequence, remember we said, is kind of like process. It is describing a how-to or giving you directions of some sort. So for sequence, it's really just honing in on what is this process that we are trying to learn and making sure we understand all the steps involved. Now with these final three, there's a surface level understanding and then there's kind of a deeper level, more analytical understanding for all three of them. So obviously with cause and effect, we're looking at causes and effects. Compare and contrast, we're looking at similarities and differences. Problem solution, we're looking at problem and the solution. But the point is, guys, with any of those three, writers very rarely just put that information out there because that's it. Don't think any more about it. Just take that at face value.
No off-topic questions because I don't want to. No, permission denied. That's an off-topic questions. Next, you have been stopped.
So for example, with compare and contrast, if we look at similarities and differences and we don't get any kind of new understanding from that, it's a little bit like,
Well, that was pointless.
So with cause and effect, compare and contrast, and problem solution, it could just be outlining these different relationships, but more likely the author is pushing you to think something new or understand something in a different way. So I think a cool thing to do is kind of look at how these text structures we've looked at tie in with author's purpose that we talked about last week. We talked about how narrative structure is a literary structure, and then informational structures go with informational writing, logically. So guys, when we think back to what we said about our author's purposes, remember that with entertain, we said that that fits with all literary texts. So if you have a narrative literary structure, the purpose of that piece is to entertain, and if we tie in that why does that matter, remember you are reading for theme when you read a literary text that is meant to entertain. So that's all on its own. Author's purpose is to entertain. It's a narrative structure. We know we're seeking theme. The 5 other structures we looked at are already identified as informational structures. What we found last week is that informational texts can be intended just to inform, or they can be intended to persuade. Description is pretty straightforward, just intended to inform. The whole purpose is describing something to you and making sure you understand all its various parts. Sequence would also fit with the inform piece. But if you remember, we talked a little bit about another author's purpose that actually fits perfectly with sequence. We briefly talked about explain as an author's purpose and how that purpose was simply to describe steps to you, to give you guidance, directions. It's a how-to. Doesn't that sound like sequence? So sequence could be inform or explain. With our purely informational text, we know we are just gaining understandings of new concepts and information. Now, the final 3 that I was talking about earlier, cause and effect, compare and contrast, problem solution, can kind of have a foot in both worlds. Any of the 3 could be purely to inform, but oftentimes these structures are used also to persuade, particularly problem solution. If I'm telling you there's a problem that exists, and I'm telling you that there's a potential solution that exists, you haven't quite utilized it yet, I'm trying to convince you to take this solution that I'm offering. When we compare and contrast to create a new understanding of something, I might be trying to convince you to see a new pattern, perspective, or understanding. Of those three, cause and effect is the one that is more likely informative most of the time. However, there are times when cause and effect can be used to persuade. Remember, with texts that are intended to persuade, you are looking to see what it is the author is trying to get you to think or do, and deciding, do you agree with him or her? So I just want us to keep author's purpose in mind as we look at text structure, because they're very closely related. Why an author is writing often impacts how the author writes. So as we do our practice today, we're going to look both at what was the author's purpose and what is the structure of the text. And we'll see how that impacts our reading. So let's go practice as we get ready to call it a wrap on week 3. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in a moment.